Good day, everybody. We're talking about globalization and outsourcing, two of the more interesting aspects of our world today. Why? There's only one statistic that becomes quite important when we talk about outsourcing or globalization. In the 1800s, only about 2% of world GDP was either an import or export. 2%. Why is that? First, transportation. It's very difficult to make a product in the United States and sell it in England. Of course, you had to go through the seas, which is shipping. Shipping could be dangerous during those times as well, in addition to just not many boats. And it would take weeks to cross the ocean. It just wasn't very fast. So it was difficult to trade from one country to another. You usually traded on continents as opposed to across the oceans. But 2% is still 2%. Today, that figure is significantly higher. How much higher? About 60% of what we see is either an import or an export. An interesting statistic, about 60% has went from 2% in 1800s to about 60% today. In fact, only in the 1970s, that figure was about 28%. It doubled just since the 1970s, somewhere around there. So it went from 2% to about 28% or so in the 1970s. It's about 150 years. And it took about 50 years for that to double. That's how quickly it's happened. What are the drivers of that? I mentioned earlier about transportation. Transportation is one. Telecommunications is the other. You can actually make something in one country and sell it in another via telecommunications, the internet. The internet is one of the greatest inventions that's ever occurred. It's right up there with the printing press. Certainly you can't have one without the other. Some would say the printing press or the wheel is some of the greatest inventions in history, if not the greatest. The wheel is often seen as that. Fire is often seen as one of the greatest inventions that one has seen. The printing press, yes, and then maybe a century later, or several centuries later, you're looking at the internet. Many factors went into the creation of the internet, including the ability of telecommunications and technology to create the computer, the chip. All of those have, over time, concluded into this thing we call the internet, which allows us to promote our products and services throughout the world, no matter where we are. You can make something in Zimbabwe and sell it in China, or vice versa. So, transportation, telecommunications, all related to technology. I call them the 3 T's for some reason. Those 3 aspects have been the drivers to what we've seen as this rise towards globalization. Is globalization good? We hear so many negative aspects about globalization. In fact, globalization is one of the greatest inventions, if we could use that word liberally, that's ever seen. Why? It's because it's expanded our market. Instead of our market just being your town, your city, your county, your state, even your country, the market's your world. That means that in terms of marketing and advertising, if you're not considering the global marketplace, then you're leaving out a wide swath of potential income. In fact, when we create marketing campaigns, it's not just for your town, your state, or your country. It is for the global marketplace. We have this saying in HR called spray and pray. And we also have that comment in marketing as well, which means you disseminate your information as much as possible. In human resources, we try to find the most opportune individuals to hire. And so we spray our recruitment advertisements as far as they can go, hoping that the person who's best suited for this position is one that we eventually hire. So you spray the marketplace with your message, hoping that the person that you're trying to reach actually sees your message. That's what globalization, in a way, has done. Throughout the world, we hope that anybody who has a computer, even on a phone, is going to be able to see this message and hopefully respond to it. Then globalization will have accomplished its goal, which is to broaden the economic marketplace for a company. A company now can sell their products throughout all corners of the world. Do they have to be good? Not necessarily. You just have to have what we call a hit. You have to have something that, the term we use is viral, something that goes viral, where enough people see it and say, wow, that's really interesting. We want to make sure that we have enough clicks in terms of X or Twitter or Instagram or Facebook. Enough people see it and go, wow, that's really interesting. It really doesn't matter what you're selling, what people are buying, what they're seeing, as long as they're intrigued by it, as long as they remember it. In fact, in some cases, just getting the clicks is enough to make money. You can make thousands of dollars a year if you get enough clicks on what you put on the internet through any of the sites, including TikTok. So along with this march towards globalization, which really is creating one marketplace, it's going to have a societal benefit as well. What is that societal benefit? There's a saying that what you're unaware of, you tend to be more nervous about. You tend to be less comfortable with it. There's a great saying that says travel is fatal to prejudice. And it means that the more you travel, the more you're aware of, the less concerned, the less nervous you are about something or somebody. Which means if people are more familiar with other people throughout the world, including their products, they're going to be more welcoming to the message that it brings. So globalization has been a great boom, not just economically, but societally. We know and converse with people quite easily in all parts of the world. We're able on a Zoom call or through YouTube or some of the others to find out, to meet people throughout our world, to become familiar with who they are, how they talk, what they believe in, what they wear, how they live. We feel after a while that we know them. We have a good sense of who they are, what they want to do, where they want to go. And that in so many ways reduces the barriers and apprehensions that we have about somebody or some people that we may never have met. And so this move towards globalization has benefited economically, as we've said, but also societally. It's broken down many of the barriers that we have about people and countries. It's made the world smaller, maybe more understandable. It's only a generation or two that going overseas was seen as a singular or lifetime event. Now for some, it's an annual trek. It's part of their vacation schedule. Let's hop on over. I know some people, it doesn't mean that they're wealthy, that'll go to London just for the weekend. Granted, I know it's expensive, but the ability to do so is much more attainable, reachable than ever before. In fact, you can plan some vacations out far enough in advance where the cost of a plane ticket is much less than it was some years ago. As a result, we are more familiar with our world, and we have, in some ways, the ability to take more advantage of it. In terms of marketing and advertising, not just for our products, but ourselves, it's becoming much easier to be known for something or somebody. It's easier to promote yourself or a book online. In fact, just speaking of books, there's over 4 million different types of books produced every year. 4 million. It's quite a lot. Many of those are self-published, and that's because anybody anywhere can publish a book. Quite an outstanding accomplishment. So if we want to promote a message, if we want to promote a product, it's much easier today given the prevalence of globalization. Remember I talked about some of the positive and negatives associated with globalization? Well, economically, it's a positive aspect. Societally, it's a positive aspect. One aspect that has become of concern is this notion of outsourcing. Outsourcing is where we believe that we can produce a product outside of our country at a lower cost, bring that product back to our country and sell it and have greater profits. The place where we live is just too expensive to do business anymore. As a result, we've decided that this is not where we feel we should be producing our product. Selling it, yes, but producing it, no. Since the 1970s, it's become increasingly expensive for companies to produce products in the United States. If you can produce that product in another country, you can often move your raw materials or any types of product materials that you need, sources, to other countries, have them create and build that product, and then ship it back to the United States and still sell it for less, even after you pay for the transportation costs. Transportation costs have fallen so much over the years. But it's just much cheaper because of not just labor, but taxes and other sorts of fees. We often think that it's just the average cost of wages that have really done damage to our ability in the United States to produce, to manufacture a product or service. But it is the taxes. It's the cost of land. We all combine that into the cost of goods sold or the cost of doing business. It's just too expensive to do it here in the United States. Instead, we'll ship it to Mexico, where wages are 80 to 90% less, and the types of regulations that we may have, often called red tape, that you may have in Mexico are much less, dramatically less than would be in the United States. All of those costs are significantly smaller. Again, it's not just the hourly wages. Social Security, unemployment insurance, all of these additional costs that are added to making a product, to hiring an employee in the United States, are much, much less in other countries, if they have those costs at all. So you can see why so much production is being sent overseas, why countries like Mexico, Korea, Vietnam, Thailand, Cambodia have taken so much of our productions away from the United States. Sometimes, as it says here, outside organizations can provide more value. Sometimes they can provide more cost effectiveness, and sometimes they may provide services and products in a more timely manner. Regulations, employee costs, taxes, all are usually lower outside the United States. It's often because the cost of living in other countries is lower than the United States. All you have to do is live in California for a time, and you'll see how much more expensive it is to buy gas, even groceries. Some people will say it's the same food. Why is it so much more expensive in California? It's often because the land that you have to buy to put that shopping center or just simply that supermarket on is much more expensive. For somebody to make their money back, they have to charge more for the products or services that they offer. When you do have wages that are significantly higher in the United States, it's going to raise the cost of what you buy. So the cost of doing business in California is quite high. The cost of doing business in the United States is quite high vis-a-vis to Mexico and some of the other surrounding countries, especially in Latin America. So we outsource. Outsourcing work to companies located overseas. We now know the majority of Nike products are made overseas, China, Indonesia, and Vietnam. Why is that? And this is what's quite important, these two aspects. First of all, the customer doesn't care where the product is made. Quite important. The second important aspect is there's no difference in terms of quality. So all you're looking at is a savings in costs, an increase in profits. Again, for offshoring or outsourcing, as long as these two factors exist, there's really no reason to produce the product in a more expensive company in the country. If The customer doesn't care where they buy where the product is made. That's a great enhancement or boom to outsourcing. And secondly, if there's no discernible difference in quality, whether it's made by an American worker or, in this case, an Indonesian worker, if those two factors exist, a company would be in some ways foolish not to move their products overseas. If you're in human resources or even marketing and advertising, you would promote a country's at least deliberate investigation to determine if they should outsource or offshore their production. You really can't see why that shouldn't be done. Some would say, well, it's not good to do that for your country. The problem is if you as a company do not move your operations overseas, your competitors may and will. As a result, their costs are going to be much lower, and they could, over time, have costs for products that are much less than yours, and that could affect your competitiveness if you don't move overseas. And that's an interesting statement, because some would say you should stay here. But if a company stays in a higher cost country, yet competitors go to lower cost countries to produce products or services, over time, what would happen is the company whose costs are lower will be able to price their product much more competitively than those that live in a high cost country. Interesting aspects to consider. Globalization and outsourcing is one of the most fundamental aspects of an economy today, and one that I believe more than any other factor over the last 50 years has caused the consternation in some countries, but also the dramatic escalation in standard of living for others. It will continue to have an impact on our ability to provide, sustain a adequate standard of living for those in the United States, but it will also continue to be a boom for those that have a lower standard of living in the United States, because that allows them to charge less to have companies go to their countries, and then they use those monies to produce those products to rebuild that country, to advance their own country. Eventually, their standard of living will rise, sometimes at the expense of the United States, but it'll also create a middle class that over time will be able to, over time, again, buy US products. That's the one good news about globalization, outsourcing, and offshoring, which is those companies who relocate to another country do so because the standard of living is lower, and therefore the cost to make the product is lower. But those countries will take those monies that companies are spending in that country, and they will invest in infrastructure and education. And over time, they will continue to advance their standard of living. They will raise their standard of living because their educational systems will get better, and their infrastructure will get better, and their people will be more advanced as a result of these jobs that flow to those types of countries. Those employees who years earlier would not have been able to afford some of the more advanced products maybe made in the United States are now, because of a rising standard of living, able to do so. They are now customers of the United States as well, because they've raised their standard of living to be able to buy some of the more expensive products that US makes, the iPhones and even the cars. So while the United States may have lost some competitiveness over the years, as these other countries were creating these products, manufacturing in particular, the hope is over time that those countries build their economies up to where they become a not just competitor, but a buyer of US products and services. Globalization, outsourcing, and offshoring are actually good things in the long term, but can be painful in the short term. Thanks, everybody. Enjoy your day.